Welcome to the Jubilee Museum series. I'm your host, Wanda Dengel, and in today's episode, we are going to look at the contributions that women religious made to the growth of the Catholic Church and also to the history of our country. Joining me today is our guest, Patrick Dengel, and he is here to in place of Shawn Kenney.
Yeah, Shawn is on assignment, and I really appreciate your asking me to be on the telecast. This is an important telecast as far as I'm concerned, because most of my formation was involved with sisters when I was in the grade school and partial middle school.
Mm-hmm. I too had nuns growing up in elementary school and high school, and actually when I went on to college, bachelor's, I don't think there were any in my graduate school, but yes, the nuns oftentimes were teachers.
Now you have my curiosity. Sometimes I hear the word nuns, and sometimes I hear the word sisters. Is there any difference?
Well, we have used them for a long time interchangeably, but technically, a nun is one who lives a contemplative life and excludes herself from the outside world, whereas a sister, it's a more familial term, and she is to be a sister to everyone that she meets. So, although we've used them interchangeably, technically that is the difference.
That's interesting. So I sometimes wonder what an individual, a young lady wants to become a nun or a sister. What do they just go to the mother house and say, "I want to be a nun"? Is it?
Well, I think you make that discernment, but then you go through different stages. We have here a picture, and you can see over on the left is a picture of a nun doll, and you can see her hair, and that is a postulant. And that would be the kind of outfit she would have, just a simple dress, but you would see her hair. The next stage was...
So postulant is basically someone who's thinking about becoming a nun, or?
It's a period of time where she's asking to be accepted into the congregation. Then the next stage is the novice, and there you see she has a white veil and no hair is showing, and that's another period of time that she is still in training, and then finally when she takes her first vows and her perpetual vows, the type of habit she would be wearing is the one that you see on the far right in the back row.
So let's talk a little bit about those vows. What do you mean the vows taken?
Okay. Normally there are three vows that they're generally taken. The vow of poverty, vow of chastity, and the vow of obedience. Poverty meant that they owned nothing, and they are trying to be Christ-like. When Christ was on earth, he didn't own anything. He didn't attach himself to any earthly things. In fact, as Father Kevin Lutz, the founder of the Jubilee Museum, put it, Christ didn't even own the cross that he was crucified on. It belonged to the Roman Empire. The second vow is chastity, and the sisters or nuns consecrated their lives to Jesus Christ. He was the love of their life, And they also consecrated themselves to those that they were to serve, whether it was the sick or the dying in the hospitals, whether it was the children they were teaching in schools, or those that they cared for in orphanages, or even the former prostitutes who were receiving training in daily living. Even they were, well taken care of by the nuns. Because the nuns consecrated their lives to helping those other people. And then finally, obedience, that was to the Mother Superior, following the orders that she had.
So are these vows taken, let's see, you said there are 3 stages. The first is apostolate. So do they give the vows at the postural level? Or?
No, I think, I have not been a nun myself, but I'm not sure when these vows are taken. Right. I would think that they would be taken when they make their final vows.
The perpetual vows?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Oh, well, that makes interesting. So you're saying vows of poverty, chastity, and
obedience. But there is a 4th vow that some congregations take, and that is the vow of humility. Oh. There were a group of nuns, the Good Shepherd Convent in Columbus. Those nuns took the vow of humility, and they were imitating, or trying to imitate in secret, the vow of humility, just to be more Christ-like. The Good Shepherd Convent was well known in Columbus for taking in girls who had been court-ordered, for prostitution or similar crimes, to either go to jail or to go to the Good Shepherd Convent. Well, as Father Kevin Lutz put it, the smart ones chose the Good Shepherd Convent.
Sure.
And they got a clean place to live. Many of them couldn't read, so the nuns taught them to read, and they also taught them domestic skills like sewing, knitting, and things that could prepare them just for a regular life once they graduated and found gainful employment in the community, and they could become good citizens. Well, an example of this vow of humility that the nuns displayed was, for instance, if the girls were helping them clean the bathroom, the nun would do the toilet. And even if the young lady would say, well, sister, let me do that, she'd say, no, I'm fine with this. You take care of cleaning the sink. Or if they were working in the garden, and this also might be the case, with the orphanage, the nuns would pull the weeds, and the children or the young women who were in their care were in charge of watering the garden. And through this example, many of these women who had been exploited noticed the selflessness of these women, and oftentimes converted to Catholicism. That was not the purpose of this program. The purpose was to rehabilitate these women and give them a good and satisfying life so they could become good citizens. But some did become Catholic, and even a few wanted to become nuns. Now, normally, if you were a prostitute, you were not a candidate, for any congregation. But the foundress of the Good Shepherd Convent felt that if a woman had a calling, that this was her way of showing repentance for her sins.
You keep on bringing up a couple of things that I find interesting. You use the word congregation. You have indicated that some orders. So, first of all, a congregation is what?
a group, excuse me, a group of women.
That follow a specific set of guidelines, is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. And then you talked about different orders or different congregations. They are all Catholic.
Yes, but they don't necessarily all wear the same habits. They wear, like for instance here, we have a nun of the Immaculate Conception, and this is the winter habit. It's dark, and it's blue. And then during the summertime, and especially when this congregation was in areas where it was very warm, they would wear a white habit.
I see.
And then there's...
And the habit is not does that include the veil?
Yes, that's
Okay.
part of
Okay.
When we say habit, we include everything.
Okay.
Now, there is a new congregation that is in Columbus, and their headgear is interesting, as you can see in this next picture. These are the Brigittines. This congregation was founded in the Scandinavian countries, and it resembles a crown. They have gems on the front and the back and both sides and one on top, and they are red. And this symbolizes the 5 wounds of Christ.
I see.
The hands and the feet and the being speared in the side.
So are you saying that most congregations have their own style of veils and?
Yes, you'll see just a whole host of differences. You may remember the flying nun.
Yes.
That was the headdress was way out. And the Holy Cross nuns, there you see, part of their veil has like a pleated halo. Excuse me. The Holy Cross nuns were very important to our country because they had just come to the United States several years before the Civil War, and they were asked by the governor of Indiana, the Holy Cross nuns, to help with the wounded and the dying, to help the physicians on the battlefield, with those young men who were dying. And they were actually, the Holy Cross nuns were the first Navy nurses because they also served on the naval ship, the Red Rover, during the Civil War. There is a story that Father Lutz tells that he had heard and had to do with the Holy Cross nuns. It's that one of the nuns was out in the field and taking care of a wounded soldier that the doctors had actually given up on, and she took such good care of him that he finally recovered and returned to normal life. Years later, he became a physician. And at one point in his life, he went to a Catholic hospital in Columbus to practice. And he heard a voice, a nun's voice, and realized it was the same woman who had taken care of him. And she was, of course, much older.
Yeah.
I think she was in her 80s or 90s at the time. But anyway, the nuns were there to help. In fact, there is a letter in the Library of Congress that was written by the Union Surgeon General to President Abraham Lincoln regarding the nuns who were helping. And at the time, Catholics were, there was a prejudice against Catholics, and to have a nun on the battlefield, well, that was even worse. But he himself was a Protestant surgeon, and he wrote this letter to President Lincoln extolling the virtues of these women. He said there were not any Protestant organizations or groups that could compare to the work that these women did. They were obedient, they followed through, they were dedicated, and he let President Lincoln know of all their work.
Well, I think through the course of history, I think the Roman Catholic Church has had a lot of different orders of not just priests, but monks, brothers, and sisters, and nuns, contemplative nuns, and there's the cloister outfits and the different things of that nature. And I think that it all surrounds the Roman Catholic Church. Other religions, other denominations do have nuns, or not nuns, but do have sisters that work inside the church. One of the most famous, I guess, is the Salvation Army, where they have both men and women working side by side. So the whole history has a lot of different unique stories about how women have played an important part in the Catholic Church and the Church itself.
Well, these women played an important role in the Civil War.
Yeah.
Was in this nation, and they were recognized by non-Catholics for the work that they did. They didn't set out to make a name for themselves or to glorify themselves. They did it because they saw there was a need, and they went forward with that. Now,
interesting.
If we'll go back to that picture of the Holy Cross nun, you'll notice the collar. The collar is made of cellulose, which is a stiff material. It comes from the hard part of a plant. And what is interesting about the collar is the nuns used that stiff material in another way. If we can go to the next photo, that is an obituary box.
An obituary box. What?
Do you know how?
No. What is that?
Well, you can see these discs in the box, and each disc has a number. When a sister of the Holy Cross died, her name was written on the death register, and each line was numbered. And so these discs were made from the collar because it was stiff. And then they would write the number that was on the death register and put that into this box. Well, this box was located outside the chapel, and every time the nuns would go to chapel, they would pick up a disc and say a brief prayer and drop it into the hole on the other side. And this practice continued until all the discs were gone. The lid with the hole would slide over to the other side, and then the practice would continue from there.
So, and that's called an obituary box.
Right, because the prayers were said for the repose of the souls of the sisters who had passed away.
And I'm assuming that those obituary boxes are prevalent in the congregations, the sisters.
I don't know if every congregation had it, but I'm assuming that some form may have been a part of the different congregations. And then we also have the nuns that were important to Portsmouth, Ohio. They were a contemplative order. They were nuns. They were the Poor Clares of Adoration, and they are known for making the communion wafers. I think we have a machine. It shows you, if we'll go to the next picture, and there you see one of the Poor Clare nuns. They had brown habits, and you can see she's wearing an apron, and they pour the ingredients, the batter, inside this machine. Now there's specific ingredients that are put into it. There is no yeast, and excuse me. And once the sister would pour the batter in, she'd pull down the top and say a little prayer, either like the Glory Be or the Hail Mary. And they knew when they finished that prayer that the wafers would be done.
Huh. That's interesting. And so I'm assuming, were there other congregations that also made hosts, or was it just the Poor Clares?
Oh, there were other, but they were usually contemplative groups. And that's how
cloistered?
they made...
Or,
yes,
usually.
And I think that was the way they made money for their livelihood, because they did not, they were a contemplative order, so they had to have an income some way.
Okay.
But besides the machines, there were also older communion implements. If we'll bring up the next picture. And that gives you a close-up. The larger hosts were the ones that were used at Mass during the consecration, or it was used to place in the monstrance, which is an ornamental...
an adoration.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the smaller ones were the ones that were used during communion at Mass. And so that gives you an idea of what it looked like. So that was an impression. Sometimes, this one is more elaborate. Sometimes there's just a cross in the center.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Before the electrical, machines that you saw the nuns from the Perpetual Adoration group using, there were the communion wafer tongs. And there you see you can't see the impressions, but they had the impressions just like you saw in the previous photograph, and they would pour the batter and then put it over in an open fire and make the hosts that way.
And so they gave the impressions on the host.
Yes.
Wanda, since both you and I had nuns and sisters during the parochial schools, there are certain congregations that are teachers.
Yes, there were.
And I had the Dominicans, and
I had the Franciscans from Joliet, Illinois.
And so as teachers, their job, of course, their responsibilities were, of course, to go to different grade schools or be assigned to grade schools and teach.
Or high schools.
Oh, okay.
And they also taught in universities.
Okay.
And they were administrators, they were principals, but the contributions that the nuns made, besides teaching, preparing children for citizenship roles, they also were nuns who contributed to the hospital systems, and they also contributed to our social services, the orphanages they ran, the nuns who took in those prostitutes. I mean, they were so self-sacrificing. They were always putting other people first, and I don't think we can ever forget that, or we should never forget that, how much they gave up of their own lives to make other lives better. But there is an interesting item in the Jubilee Museum, which I think we should use to end our program. Now, our nuns didn't have this item. Did your nuns?
You want to show that picture?
the clicker.
The clicker. I don't think so. They had a big bell.
Oh, yours had a bell.
Yeah, and so they would ring the bell to let us know when we had to go back after recess.
Oh, well, no, this wasn't used for recess. Could we bring that clicker back so we can explain how it worked? You can see over on the right-hand side a part of the wood that you would grab, and that would bring the top part of it toward you, and then it would snap back and make a clicking sound, wood on wood. And it was used by sisters, some groups, to quiet down a class if they were getting a little rowdy, or oftentimes it was used when children would go to daily mass. They would line up outside the aisle, and when they heard the click from sister, then everybody genuflected, and then they went into their pews.
When you were in school, did they have the clicker, or did they
No,
have
my sisters didn't use the clicker. I think they clapped their hands, and that was a signal to genuflect, and then we went into our pews, according to the number that fit in the pew. But anyway, they were women who made great sacrifices for others without ever thinking about themselves. And I think if you know a nun, be sure to thank her.
Yeah, it is interesting. The Jubilee Museum has a special room just designated to the different lifestyles, the different habits, the different tenets, of their faith. And going to the Jubilee Museum, I think that's one place that most should see.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our program, so be sure to visit the Jubilee Museum and take a look at the Nuns Sisters room, as well as their other rooms. They have a wonderful collection. You will be amazed. Don't just go, but have somebody give you a tour. That's where you'll learn lots of things. The Jubilee Museum is located at 57 South Grubb Street in Columbus, Ohio. Visit their Facebook page and their website. Until next time, goodbye and have a great day.